Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm a librarian at the Cosby Library and Community Commons, and in this video I'll be showing you how to use the quilling supplies that were included in the adult and teen Craft to Go kits. Quilling is a really simple hobby. It's basically just rolling small strips of paper into pretty shapes and then gluing them down onto a card or other surface. So this hobby has been around for decades, but it's recently become popular again, and part of it is because it is so simple and the results can be very stunning. So this is an example that I put together just using my initial and creating some freehand embellishments. When you get to a more advanced level, this is a commercially made greeting card, but you can see that the shapes get very abstract, and you can use a border or an outline to make some very specific kinds of shapes. We'll just be doing the basics today, making leaf shapes or teardrop shapes, circles, squares, those kinds of more regular shapes. So the supplies that you'll need that were included in your bag are the paintbrush, the quilling tool. So this has just a small gap, a small slot here at the tip of the tool. You'll also need your quilling papers. So you should have gotten about 30 strips of quilling paper. And I'll talk a little bit more about quilling paper in a minute. Some extra supplies that you might want to supply are tweezers, and I would recommend, I don't use tweezers a lot, I actually just use my fingers, but some people find it a whole lot easier to use tweezers to manipulate the shapes and put them exactly where they want them. So I would recommend, if you use tweezers, to use these point end tweezers instead of the slant tip tweezers. I find that these work a lot better than these. You'll need some scissors because most of the time you will not be using the strips whole. You'll be cutting them either into halves or into thirds to make small shapes like this. You'll need some sort of glue. And I'm using this Craft Bond glue. This is actually a little bit thick for this craft, but it's what I have around the house. But you can just use regular old school glue and that will work perfectly fine. These cards were included in your kit, so you'll need these as a surface to put your quilling on. You may also use these to put the glue on, although you can also use other containers. So I used this paint palette to make my example. So I used this center part to make a thin layer of glue that I would dip my quilled pieces into, and then I used one of the wells to put my, my main pot of glue in. So you might want to use one of these, but you could also, I'll be demonstrating using just a washed takeout container, which works as well. And you'll see that professional quillers or people who do this a lot as a hobby, they might use old gift cards to put their glue on. They might even use like a paper plate. There's all sorts of things that you can use to put your glue on. And when you get to a really advanced level with quilling, you'll find that there are many other kinds of quilling tools out there. There are jigs that you can get to make certain complex shapes. There's a comb that you can get to make very specific shapes and designs. So there are a lot of directions that you can take this to become more advanced in this hobby if you decide that you like it. You may also want some markers to make a design on your paper that you will quill on top of, so like I did here, but that's totally optional. You can also just do freehand designs just on a blank card, and a lot of people do that. They'll make flowers or just abstract swirled designs just on a blank card. So lots of different options there. And I'm going to keep this here for a minute. Let's talk about quilling strips. Quilling strips come in different widths, and I tried to provide at least 2 different widths in your bag for you to experiment with. So when you buy quilling strips, they will come in a package like this. And the ends of the strips will all be glued together, kind of like a notepad of paper, so that you can pull off just one strip at a time and it doesn't hopefully turn into a big mess. Now, sometimes it turns into a big mess anyway, and in that case, you can just put it in a Ziploc bag like I showed you with those others. But these do come in different widths, and so the widths that I have seen are 10 millimeter, 7mm, 5mm, and 3mm. I find the 5mm the easiest to work with, but you may have other shapes. So I just wanted to give you a chance to experiment and see what works best for you. So this is 10mm. This is the widest that I've seen the paper. And you can get packs that are just a single color if you don't want the multi-packs. And then this is 3mm here. So you can see how much thinner that is. And then this, I believe, should be 5mm. And you can see this package hasn't been used at all, so it's still stuck together at the ends. And you can see how you would just pull off a single strip that you might want to use. So this is 5mm. So like I said, this is the size that I think is easiest to work with. But you can see that I used all different sizes to make this design. So here are these really tall ones. Those are going to be the 10mm strips. This yellow one here is a 5. I believe our multi-packs came with 3, 5, and 10. Actually, I think the blue and the yellow, I think those are 5s. Oh, this one right here. That's a 3, because that one I put on top of another one. So yeah, I believe our packs came with 3, 5s, and 10s. I don't believe we had any 7s in our packs, unless they were all used to make the participant packs. So you'll have at least 2 different sizes to experiment with and see which one works best for you, if you would rather have just a completely flat design or if you would rather have a more textured sort of 3D design like what I've made here. That's totally up to you. A lot of people make totally flat designs just using a single width of paper. So I'm going to clean off my work area here and we will go ahead and get started. One other thing that you will need that you'll want to prepare before you get started are 2 pieces of damp paper towel. So be sure and get that as well. Alright, so you can see that I've already added a few shapes to my tree design. I will continue to add more. I had to restart the video, so we will pretend like I'm just starting from the very beginning. So here I have my glue set up, and I have, again, because my glue is on the thick side, I have a little bit of water down here at the bottom that I'm going to use to thin out my glue. So you'll want one relatively small puddle and one bigger puddle, and I'll show you how we'll set up that bigger puddle here in a minute. I have my damp paper towel down here, and I'm going to set my paintbrush down on this whenever I need to set it down, and it's got glue on it, and I can even fold it over like that, and that will keep the glue from drying out on my paintbrush. My other damp paper towel I can use to lay over my glue when I'm not using it, and again, that's going to keep it from drying out in between uses. I've got some quilling strips already pre-cut into thirds because I know for this particular project I'm going to be making some smaller shapes, and this is about the size that I'll use. I didn't exactly measure them, I just kind of eyeballed it, and I have different sizes, different widths. I have some of the 10mm, I have some of the 5, and some of the 3, so I'll show you all those different widths. And I've got my quilling tool. So let's go ahead and get started with some basic shapes. And I will start with one of the green strips. So the basic idea of quilling is that you will insert your quilling strip into the tool, and you want to make sure that the paper is not sticking way far out of the tool. You basically want the tool to just grab the end of that paper so that you can start to roll it. And this is really all there is to it. So this is the beginning of almost all of your basic quilling shapes. And then what creates, you know, whether it's a circle or whether it's a square or a leaf shape, that is going to be done after this first initial step. So I've rolled it up. I've tried to keep it sort of even, but if it tornadoes a little bit, if it pops up a little bit, don't worry too much about it. when you're first starting out. And then after you take your shape off of the quilling tool, you're going to let it expand just a bit, or as much as you feel is needed. So I'm going to stop right about there. Hold it with my finger, and then I'm going to use just a tiny bit of my glue. Again, I'm going to water it down just a little bit. And I haven't really seen anybody talk about, you know, whether to swirl the paper clockwise or counterclockwise. That doesn't really seem to be something that makes a huge difference, because again, it's going to be in the shaping that we're going to do here in a minute. So you're just going to do just the tiniest amount of glue on the end of the paper. And this is another tool that you can buy. There's actually a precision glue applicator that you can buy. And just press and hold for a little bit. And if you wanted to use it just as a circle, then you're done. And this actually is a pretty nice circle. So I'm going to use it just like this. I'm going to go ahead and dip it into my bigger puddle of glue. But before I do that, I'm going to let it sit for just a second. I need to take this larger puddle of glue, and I need to spread it out. So I'm going to spread this glue puddle out into a thin layer. Because you really only need the tiniest amount of glue to stick it down to the paper. So there, I've thinned my glue out. I've spread it out into a really thin layer. I'm going to take my quilled shape here, just drop it in. And then I'm going to try not to move it at all from side to side. I'm just going to press down lightly so that I make sure that I get every part of my shape with a little bit of glue on it. And here's where some people use their tweezers. This is going to be harder because I'm holding it up in the air. But normally I just use my fingers to try to pluck it straight back up out of the glue puddle, and then drop it right down where you want it to go. And you might find this a whole lot easier with tweezers, so do feel free to use tweezers if you feel that makes it easier. And then you just press lightly, and your shape is applied. And once it dries, it will be held on there tightly, and you can even push other shapes up against it. That's how you get those really nice solid designs. So one by one you'll put down your pieces, and once they're down, I mean they're down really firm, and so you can push other pieces up against them to make custom shapes that fill in certain holes in your design that you're trying to fill. Let's make a more complex shape. So let's see, I'm going to use purple here. So this is a 5mm strip of purple. Again, just going to roll. Until everything is rolled up. Take it gently off my quilling tool. And release, slowly release until it's about the size that you want. I'm going to stop it right there. And I still actually have plenty of glue on my paintbrush. Again, just barely add a tiny bit of glue. And now to form shapes, I'm going to hold that in place for a second. I'm going to make a square shape out of this because that's kind of what I want to use next in my pattern. So to make a square, what I want to do is you want to start from the place where your seam is, or at least that's what I always do. So where your seam is, you want to pinch and make a corner right there. And pay attention to what's happening to the layers inside your shape while you're doing this. This one is looking a little bit odd because the layers are not separating quite like I want them to. So what you can do is you can use your quilling tool to go back in there and kind of rearrange the layers before you go any further. And you can kind of correct some of that. So I've pinched and made a corner right where that seam is. So that way that seam is not going to be very noticeable, and that also seems to kind of hold it into place. I'm going to pinch directly opposite. And now I'm going to turn, and I'm going to pinch again on both sides. You can do this one side at a time, or you can do them both at a time. And now I have a little square or a little diamond. And I can even use my quilling tool or my fingers to make it into a somewhat curved shape. I like to just use my fingers, but you might find it easier to use your quilling tool. And I can make it into sort of more of a star shape. And again, if you find that you're losing some of that definition inside, this might be where you would use your tweezers perhaps. If I ever end up with like a big gap in the middle that I don't like, sometimes that's when I fill it in with a tiny little cylinder of paper so that it has sort of a center that takes up that space in the middle. But usually this is sort of like with the doodling exercise. If you joined me for that one, quilling is more about the big picture and not about each individual shape. So a lot of times if an individual shape does not turn out how you want it, then it probably won't be that noticeable in the final design. Again, you're going to put it down. And because this one has, there we go. So I want to show you the glued side. So there you can see how well the glue is distributed there. You don't want it to creep up on the sides of your shape. That's why you don't want to move your shape from side to side. If you move it from side to side while it's in the glue, you'll get big rolls of glue on the side, and that might actually show in your final design. So what I'm going to do with this one, because it is sort of curved, I'm going to put it right up against that shape right there. And I could fill in this whole tree with shapes, but you can see how nicely that fits up right against that one. So this one's actually a 3mm strip, so it's a little bit lower. This one's a little bit higher. And press that down. And then from here, let me make a leaf shape, perhaps. So here's a 10mm strip. And again, these are the ones that I actually find the hardest to work with, because they stick so far out of your quilling tool. So they kind of don't want to cooperate at first, and you may actually have to go from both sides to get the swirl started. But once you get it going, it's just like any other strip of paper. You could also, if you have a pretty steady hand and you have an X-Acto knife or something like that, you can use a ruler and cut these in half and just turn them into 5mm strips if you really want. If you ended up with some 10mm and you just don't really want to deal with them or don't need them for your design. Okay. Again, I'm going to let it release. I'm going to let this go a little bigger because I want to show you how to make a curved leaf design. So if I totally just release all the tension, that's the shape that I'm going to get with 1/3 of a strip of the 10mm. So if I wanted a bigger shape than this, I would need to use a half a strip or even a whole strip. Press and hold. And now, as you may have guessed, a leaf is really just half of a square. So you just pinch to either side. But one of the cool things that you can do is I could just use this as a plain leaf or like as an eyeball kind of shape. Or, again, I could use my fingers or my quilling tool. I could curve the end of the shape here and make that an even more complex shape. I could curve both sides. As much or as little as I want. So there we have a curved leaf shape, and I just need to decide where to put it. I think I might try to make a little flower coming up from the ground here. Now the advantage of these is they're really, really easy to dip into the glue and then put exactly where you want them because they're so tall. So if you have problems with dexterity, or maybe you have arthritis and it's kind of hard for you to deal with really small little shapes, you might actually find that the 10mm works really well for you. And put that down. Now let me show you, if I wanted to make this into a flower and I needed a stem for my flower, this is something that I find a little bit challenging, but you can make swirls with your paper. So you can see in my example here, I made some just really loose spirals. And I find these really hard to glue down, but they look really cool. So it's worth trying. Again, I'm going to start from both sides with my 10mm to kind of get it going. So with that, you just want to be a lot looser with your twirling, with your curling. And I know it's probably hard to see on the camera that I am doing this more loosely than I normally would. And I'm not going to go very far. I actually don't need a huge long strip for this. And then I'm just going to gently encourage it open to whatever degree you want. So I'm going to stop right about there, and let's see how tall I want it to be, and I'll go ahead and cut it off. So this can be a great way to use up extra little bits that you might end up with at the end of your project. And then just like before, you just dip and apply. And so where this gets tricky is when you're using the skinnier strips, and I find they just really kind of want to lose their shape when you start to dip them into the glue. But you can see that they adhere pretty quickly. So now I'm going to use my other strip. I'm going to make another one. Actually, I think actually I'll use this thinner one just for some extra texture. So I'll go ahead and use this 5mm. And again, just doing it much more loosely. And I want this one to be shorter. Okay, so I have the loose coil, this shorter loose coil that I was working on. So let me apply this. And I want this to go right in here. So now I could perhaps put a flower inside there. So I'm trying to show you with these activities, these designs, how you can use different shapes to create, actual bigger picture ideas. So it doesn't have to be all abstract. You can make, you know, flowers. You can come up with a plan, a pattern that you actually want to make and not just do it freehand. So let me get a couple of the larger strips. So I'll start with, make at least one large petal maybe for my flower, and then maybe one smaller one. So with this one, I'm planning on making, maybe make it look sort of like a tulip, maybe. So I'm going to make some really thin teardrop shapes, I think. So for a teardrop, again, you can probably guess this, a teardrop is going to be half of a leaf shape. Again, apply my glue. Press and hold. And then I'm going to pinch where that seam is. And I'm going to try not to pinch too much at the bottom, but I do want this to be sort of a thin teardrop shape, so I'm going to try to compress it. And I can test and see how well it looks. And that looks good. Go ahead and put this down. And here's where I might actually want to get my tweezers out, because from here, if I want to put another petal down in this gap, and especially if I want it to be one of the shorter lengths of paper, again, to sort of add some visual interest of different layers and different heights of paper, I'm probably going to need some tweezers to get down into that little gap. So I've got my point end tweezers here, and I will use this strip to make another petal. And try to go a little faster here. Make that, let that loosen up quite a bit so I can make a larger shape. And if you want to work really tiny, you can probably even cut the pieces into fourths, into 4 pieces each strip. Again, you just want to make sure that you're watching those interior rolls. So those kind of all migrated out to the edge. Not perfect, but again, it probably won't show too much. So here I am going to use my tweezers. Just sort of grab it. And you can see I did get a little bit of glue outside where I wanted it there, but I can just use my finger, clean that up a little bit. Actually, this is looking a little bit more like sort of an iris shape. That's all right. Press that down. And then I've got a flower started. So I will work on this some more, and at the end of the video I will show how this project turned out. This was really just to get started and show you some of the different shape possibilities. I'm going to get reset here, and I'm going to show you some combination shapes where you combine different strips of different colors and do more of a freehand design for those of you who might like to do a freehand design without a drawing underneath. Okay, so this time I'm going to do a freehand design. I'm going to try to make a goldfish or a koi. So we will see how that turns out. And I'm going to try to show you how to combine colors. And so this is one of those advanced techniques that you might want to try. So to combine colors, I actually did it on this one just as an experiment, and it didn't come out exactly how I wanted it. So I ended up using two different widths here just as an experiment. Usually when I see this, it's done with two pieces of the same width. And you can see it just ended up making sort of an outline on the outside of my shape, which looks sort of interesting, but wasn't exactly the effect I was going for. So this time we're going to try to do an actual combined shape. So to do that, you'll take two strips of the same length, or same width rather, and you can use the same length, and I'll show you how that turns out in a second. And you will glue them together, but make sure you glue them offset. So don't glue them exactly even with each other. Make sure that they're offset on both sides. So these two strips of paper are actually about the same length, and they are the same width, but I've glued them offset. And then when you start curling them, you won't run into a problem of there being too much thickness of paper to go inside your quilling tool, because that's the problem that you'll run into, among other things, if you glue them even with each other instead of offset. You won't actually be able to grab with your quilling tool. So now I'm just simply rolling the two pieces together into my tight coil. And these strips, because I want to make a bigger shape here to start with, these strips are about 2/3 the length of the total strip. So I cut off about 1/3 off the end. A little harder to control. Again, this is the 10mm size. 5mm would probably be slightly easier. And now I'm going to let that coil loosen. And you can see, I think, hopefully, both of those colors swirled there together. Now I ended up with quite a bit of yellow here, so I'm just going to cut off that tail so that doesn't show. And now I will glue my coil into place. And you can actually, you know, manipulate each coil independently and glue it down to make sure. So here, just pull on this one. You can see that loop moving inside there to get it exactly where you want it to be. Glue that one down and hold. And glue that one down and hold. And now, if I want to make sort of a fish shape, I think I want that to be kind of a teardrop shape. And now with this bigger shape, I can really pay a lot of attention to precisely manipulating where those loops are going to end up when I'm finished. With the smaller shapes, it's a little bit harder. The loops kind of do what they want to do. Or at least for me, they do. But here I can be a little bit more precise. All right, so that looks pretty good for our first try. I'm going to dip that. Again, I want to make sure to get glue. What you want to be really careful of when you're dipping is to not end up with no glue in the center. So that can cause your piece to kind of pop up in the center, and you don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to start this from the center. And there is my fish body. So I'm going to do this as if we're maybe looking down on the fish. Maybe this will be sort of a pond where I end up adding a lot of swirls to indicate water. So there's my fish body. And then I think my fish will need a fin on the top. So maybe I want to use a thinner piece to add a fin on the top. So I'm going to find either a 5mm or a 3mm here. I think in the yellow I only have 5, so we'll go ahead and use the 5 here. And I don't need this to be very big, so I'm just going to cut off a small piece. So this will be for that top fin or that dorsal fin. And glue. And let me close the door because there is construction going on the street outside, so I want to make sure you can't hear that. Alright, so I've glued my shape. And let's make this one just kind of a leaf shape for that fin. So my plan is to add it to the top of my shape here. There we go. That looks good. And I can just keep on going from here. So that was really the thing that I wanted to show you, was how to make the bigger shapes and also how to make the 2 color shapes. So you can imagine if you use 2 really strikingly different colors that this pattern will become even more obvious. I'll try to make this project more about using those 2 color tone shapes and also maybe some larger shapes. So again, I will go ahead and finish this project. I'll finish the tree. I'll come back and I'll show you both of those, and you can get possibly some inspiration or some ideas from those. But I hope you've gotten the basic technique down. And if you need any further assistance, there are lots and lots of great videos on YouTube about quilling, and I'm also always available as well. But let me go ahead and stop the video. I'll finish up my projects and I will come back and do a little bit of show and tell. Okay, so here are my finished designs. I have the embellished initial that I originally started with. I have the tree that I was working on with the added flower at the bottom to show you how that might be done. So the key with this tree design is to cover the ends of all the branches to make it look full. So you notice that I haven't completely covered the tree with quilling, but I did make sure to cover the tip of each branch. If you leave some of the tips exposed, it will look more like a fall tree, a tree that's losing some of its leaves. And you can even see that I didn't stick strictly to leaf designs. I used squares and circles in there as well. I realized that I didn't go over how to make these really tight coils. It's really simple. You just make your coil on your quilling tool and don't let it expand as you pull it off. Just keep it tight and then glue it down. And those can be really handy for little accents. So here I thought I needed another touch of color to add to my design, so I added on these 3 very tight coils of hot pink right there. You can also use them to fill in gaps or to fill in the centers of coils that might have loosened up a little bit more than you would like. So here I used those tight coils to fill in the centers of some shapes. So there's another one right there. And then finally, here's my fish design. And this is the one where I used some of the two-tone coils. So for the fins and the body of this big fish here, and also for these whirlpool designs. And so these were made by just not gluing down the ends as I released that coil, and just gluing them down as loose swirls. This is a more minimalist design. You can see that I didn't fill in all the space with quilling. I left large open spaces, so that can work well too, depending on your design. And this one can be seen from multiple angles. So it doesn't necessarily have an up or a down. And I also used that layering technique of putting coils on top of each other. So one right there, and then one right here as well on the tail of this smaller fish. And the loose coils as well. So this one uses a lot of the techniques that we've gone over. I hope you enjoy exploring this new hobby. If you need even more inspiration and instruction, there are lots and lots of resources online. You can also always email me and I will be happy to help. And enjoy your quilling.